Hello and welcome to episode 176 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. Welcome to the podcast. This week, I do some more nuclear bashing, this time with great detail and 20% more smugness.
Ford has an exciting announcement about a new Mustang. If you're excited about an even better electric Mustang Mach-E, then you're a naive eco-communist who doesn't have $300,000 to spend on a fossil-burning muscle car.
The Canadian province of Alberta is so scared of wind and solar, it's willing to shoot itself in the foot and stop a $25 billion investment that was ready to go. Alberta, shooting themselves in the foot. That's them, though. Picture the cowboy hats just shooting themselves in the foot over and over again. Thank you, Alberta. You never disappoint. Toes flying everywhere, Brian.
That is alarming. This week, we take a look at the best energy-efficient light bulb. I think it's safe to say that the LED light bulb is now the greatest invention since the light bulb.
And also this week's show, Brian sees Oppenheimer. Why the Tesla network will be the only network for non-Tesla EV drivers. And average new car prices will scare the pants off you. All that and so much more in this exciting edition of the Clean Energy Show. So you finally did it.
Yeah. Finally went and saw Oppenheimer, the famous new film from Christopher Nolan. I believe we have a clip.
Here we go.
And I just want to point out that is a slightly altered version of the clip that we used to use when we did that joke a long time ago. I thought it deserved its own tweak.
Not to spoil anything, but it's kind of interesting what they did with the sound during the nuclear explosion. I mean, they subverted your expectations.
Yeah, and I liked how they set it up ahead of time because they had other sort of smaller explosions, and they always have that delay that you don't normally see in a movie. Like if there's an explosion far away on the horizon, the sound actually takes, half a second to hit you.
Right.
And they set that up ahead of time that there'd be this delay. And, that worked well. So, yeah, lots of things to admire about the film. I thought it was a perfectly adequate movie.
Oh, God. You SOB. You curmudgeon movie reviewer. Eugene
that is my
Siskel.
quote. They can put that on the poster if they want. It's a perfectly adequate movie.
You just don't want any clips to be taken from you, do you? I thought it was a good movie. I was on the edge of my seat and transfixed for a long period of 3 hours. So
yeah, I mean, it's better than most movies, and I'm always like to encourage like original movies. Like it's not a comic book, it's not based on a novel or anything. So that's all good. I thought it was generally like movies are too long. That's my main complaint. I wasn't too crazy about the length, but it was mostly after like the last hour. I thought that could have been shorter.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Mainly because I just don't have the public fortitude to be somewhere for 3 hours.
Yeah.
It was just a long time, and people started to talk in the theater, and
Oh, is that right? But once you get used to watching movies in your home, it is annoying not to be able to pause and. But I did see it in IMAX 70mm film. That's an exciting thing. We have one of only 30 cinemas in the world that are showing it in its proper film format. Christopher Nolan likes analog film, and I feel like we've talked about analog film and film grain on this podcast probably too many times since it's a clean energy.
My wife listened to the show finally last week and said, you can tell you guys are film guys.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So it comes through every week. I hope people don't mind. It's our other hobby.
But I will say the part that has to do with clean energy is that, this was the start of the, atomic bomb program, but it was also the start of the Atomic Energy Commission, which did eventually lead to the, civilian nuclear power stations. So it is vaguely related to what we talk about here on the podcast.
Sure. No. And you're going to head out again, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm heading off on a road trip, so it looks like we're going to take next week off. I'm heading to the Telluride Film Festival in Colorado.
Now, that is a major film festival. You often hear about that. It's not one of the big ones, but it gets a lot of headlines.
It's small but important. So it happens around the same time as the Toronto Festival, and they sort of compete for films. But it will be a weird year because, of course, we have the actor strike going on. So actors, generally speaking, are not allowed to promote their films. So this is normally a star-studded event, but it remains to be seen if that's actually going to come to pass. There are a few of the smaller studios, like A24, who have agreed to all the terms of the Screen Actors Guild. And so for certain films, like from A24, the actors are allowed to promote them. So we still don't know what the schedule is like. They don't announce the schedule until the festival starts, which was one of the fun things about it. You don't know what films are going to happen until you actually make your way there. So we're taking a week off, and then 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be recording my half from Telluride, Colorado.
That's exciting. I have some suggestions.
Sure.
Brian Stockton, have you made this trip before or a similar trip?
No, I have not.
I have some advice because I've made it at least 3 times in recent years. There are some people who will be listening to us in these regions or are going to get very uncomfortable. I don't care for Wyoming. There's a reason why the Cheneys come from Wyoming. I mean, some members of my family say, well, it's an interesting landscape. It's kind of barren but it's neither new like the Rockies nor old like the desert. It's just kind of worn and tired, and it's all the same from far western Montana. Now, Montana's a huge state with a lot of amazing things in it. When you get west, it's like the trip is, this is what I've said millions of times. I can't wait for full self-driving where I can go to sleep during that trip. Because once you get there, though, once you get to Denver, and are you going through Denver? Because that is an option.
Well, somewhere near Denver.
You remember when I went to Sedona to represent your film at the Sedona Film Festival in Arizona? The shortest distance wasn't to go through Denver, but I chose to go through Denver. And it was a great experience. Denver's a great city. Lots of EVs, lots of clean energy, lots of good people, but the trip from Denver on the interstate that they built, I think, in the 80s or even early 90s. It was the newest interstate pretty much. They decided to finally put the interstate between Denver and Utah, Grand Junction, do it. So it's actually a stunning, beautiful drive that I don't think you should miss. And well, especially in the summertime, not in the wintertime. I wouldn't necessarily say take it in the wintertime because it's very much lots of, but they've got some interesting signs there for truckers. Like they say, we're not kidding. The next 20 miles is going to be hell or something like that. They've got weird things that get your attention, but it's quite beautiful. And you can stop along the side of the road. There's some big tunnels and things. And it's just, Denver is an amazing city that is relatively close to us. I mean, compared to some things, and directly south of us, by the way, if you're wondering geographically on a map where we are, we're about 12 hours drive north of Denver. And I would highly recommend it. Then you got a crap load of amazing national parks in the area, like canyon lands, and you get into Utah. There's just some stunning national parks, and you're not far away from the Grand Canyon. Have you been?
No, I've
highly
never been
recommend
to
it, Brian. You're a retired man, a little bit of money in the bank. You've got a Model S that can go far. I think now is your time. I strongly urge you to hit the Grand Canyon, because it is, and it's not just one thing. You don't just pull up and say, oh, it's gorgeous, let's go home. You drive along it, or you take a bus to different stops, and there's a completely different view at different stops. And if you want to die, you can hike down to the canyon floor and not make it back. But that's
I'm not going to do that.
One way to end your life.
But maybe there's a ramp and I can jump the Snake River Canyon.
Well, sure. In your Tesla Model S, you can give it a try, and be sure to roll audio on that for the show. But there's a ton of national parks that are stunning and gorgeous in their own way. And then you get into geography, like you would see on Roadrunner, like the Roadrunner inspired geography, which I've always wanted to see. And I finally saw it a few years ago, and just love it when I went to Sedona. It's just stunning. Well,
we're booked into Deadwood, South Dakota for the trip down there, but the other stops we haven't quite figured out yet. So I'll take that advice.
I encourage you to look at the map. Look at the map, look around. And it's a great time of year to do it, because it's shoulder season, right? It's before winter. So if there's any mountains you're dealing with, you don't have to worry about that. And then you got people back at school and families not on vacation. So it's a perfect time of year. You'd be crazy not to. It's just, this is what I hope to do one day. Shoulder season, because the national parks are so busy now everywhere. and especially rebounding after people discovered the outdoors during the pandemic for some reason. I don't know why, but they did. And yeah, it's a thing now. So that's just that. Anyway, I have some further thoughts of my vacation that I talked about in depth last week. I just want to remind people what I did as an EV enthusiast and advocate is I checked in on PlugShare. A lot of people aren't doing that, but unless there's a problem. But you have the time. Just click the PlugShare button. It'll know where you are and just say I'm charging and how much you're getting, and it'll help. And about a route planner, what I'm planning on doing is getting a dongle that works with a better route planner that you can plug into the little computer port that cars have. It's called OBD2 or something like that.
Right, yeah.
I have one for my Leaf, but it doesn't work. It's you need a Bluetooth low energy one, a more modern one to work with a better route planner. So that's the app that you use to plan your EV stops, your charging stops with a non-Tesla. It's built into Teslas, you bastards. It's right part of your dash, but Rivian recently bought it. But my point is that I could have a bit of a Tesla experience because it will take data from the car, like how much energy is left, how much energy is being used, and I can get that same experience on the screen of my car. Or not the same experience, perhaps, but it's supposed to take weather and terrain into it too if you buy the monthly fee. So I used it with a free trial for a week or 2 weeks rather during my vacation, and I'll probably just buy it for a month at a time when I do take vacations in the future, just so I have that. But I came out, I learned a lot from that trip. I feel like there's a lot that I can add to our conversations now that I didn't know before, and to our listeners. I really learned by doing. But I have the strong feeling that Tesla will be the only charging network I will use, and everyone else will too. Now, I only had a couple of times where I had to move chargers. I had to drive to a different charger. Out of, 20 charging stops, 2 of those maybe were things that didn't work and I had to drive somewhere else. That's a pain in the butt if you're in a hurry. And even if you're not in a hurry, you don't want that to happen. Why would I let that happen? I wouldn't. I would just go to Tesla chargers. And sometimes, the Tesla chargers would be like 15 stalls, and then there'd be 2 flow chargers for non-Tesla vehicles. And there'd still only be a couple of vehicles at the Tesla chargers. I saw them full once, like a 6-pack of chargers full once, but there was actually another supercharger station in that town. So I don't think it's going to be a problem if it happened today, because you only got a couple of EV drivers that could go there at any given time. So I think that, I was worried about that last week. I was worried that what's going to happen if we all do that, because we will. And don't invest in these other guys because they're going to go out of business. They have to. I mean, I just can't see them surviving against the Tesla network unless Tesla charges so much, and they might. Who knows? That, it might be worth it sometimes to go, or maybe it's near a restaurant you want to go to, or it's by your hotel. But for the most part, I can't see wasting my time not planning a route with just Tesla chargers.
Yeah, well, they definitely have a long way to go to compete against Tesla and to get up to the same level of service, but it's possible. It'll just take some time.
Yeah, years though. I mean, they're years and years away from that happening. And, a year from now, they're just going to start this, this charging network between the auto companies, the original manufacturers of automobiles. Some of them have gotten together and they're going to start a network, but that's going to take years. And Tesla, my guess is that Tesla will be ahead, and they'll see congestion at chargers. They'll build new ones because they're very good at that, as you've said in the past. And, it'll be a constant catch up. And I don't see them working out very well. If a Bolt, you have to take up 2 stalls right now at the Tesla chargers because the cord's on the wrong side.
The cords are short. You have to park in a weird way. Yeah. No, Tesla's ahead, and they're not going to stop. Like the stat is they're opening a new supercharger station somewhere in the world every 13 hours. So the lead, if anything, at this point is probably just accelerating.
So I looked at my trip from last week, and basically I looked at all the places where it was busy and where I was running into trouble. And I noticed that, Merritt, BC was the place where I had to skip town and not charge at all because it was a long weekend and the fast food lineup, so we couldn't even get lunch very easily. And the Tesla, places were busy, and they literally laughed at me, Brian, at the flow charger. I said, they just laughed. They said, no, go away. There's a whole bunch of people waiting. But if I've showed up at Merritt, BC, this town that is at the beginning of the Coquihalla Highway, between two places, well, there's 3 Tesla supercharging sites. 3!
Yeah, well, Tesla, they've got obviously the data on where their cars go, and they've got data on where the chargers are busy. They've got data on everything. So,
and they're proactive on it.
And they're proactive on it, hence they put a charger in Davidson over 3 years ago in our weird small Canadian province. But, they were 3 years ahead of anybody else putting in any other charger. These are all the places I went 3 years ago when I did my first trip to Vancouver when I first got the Tesla. And there was only one supercharger site at all of these places like Merritt and Hope, and they were kind of busy, especially on the weekend. But a lot can change in 3 years.
Oh, it's time for James's podcast corner. We don't have an intro, but I was listening to the Canadian public broadcaster CBC, the Under the Influence podcast or radio show, and now podcast. And it was back then, it was called The Age of Persuasion, I think, back then. So 10 years or 12 years ago. But they had a repeat episode. I was minding my own business, driving my Nissan Leaf, and they were talking 12 years ago with the Nissan Leaf. This is what they had to say.
The Nissan Leaf had to deal with a different issue, namely that electric cars make no sound, which can be problematic for seeing and hearing impaired pedestrians. The Leaf needed audio visibility. In a 4-year international study, Nissan consulted acoustic experts, universities, a Hollywood sound company, and the National Federation for the Blind to test for the most appropriate sound. 100 were developed, and from that list, this sound was chosen for going forward. It's interesting to me that Nissan chose a sound that was futuristic. It not only solved the problem of the electric car's audio visibility, but it also created the impression of leading technology.
Now, look at all the work they went to just for the sound.
Yeah.
4 years of international research, and then they couldn't put in a liquid-cooled system to thermally manage their battery packs. All
right, it's time for another new segment called Brian's Lightbulb Nook. Play the theme song, James.
Brian's Lightbulb Nook.
Okay, perfect. So this is
it's not a corner; it's a nook. Just to clarify,
a nook. No, I had to go to
the corner.
I had to go to the thesaurus and come up with another word for corner.
Did you really?
I did actually do that. Yeah.
The work we put into the show, people.
Anyway, so we do talk about energy efficient light bulbs every once in a while. It is a favorite topic of mine. I was an early adopter of energy efficient light bulbs because I just can't stand the waste involved in an incandescent bulb. 100-watt bulb and something like 90 watts of that is wasted as heat. They're just incredibly inefficient. Now, they do produce really pleasing light, but slowly but surely, the technology for energy efficient bulbs has been getting better. And I came across this review on YouTube, and it's a channel called The Hookup. This guy did an insane amount of work to compare 25 different light bulbs. And I wanted to give it a shout out because it's a pretty big channel. He's got a few 100,000 subscribers, but there's only about 25,000 views on this video. And I think it's because most people are just bored by light bulbs, I guess. I don't know.
Well, in the States, you have new policy that says you have to have LED finally. Yeah. The rest of the world has been way ahead of you. Like, it's just an incredible waste not to.
Yeah. And there are loopholes where like certain oven, like if you need a light bulb for your oven, they're going to allow those to continue as incandescent.
I've yet to find an LED bulb for my oven. Have you?
No, I don't think for whatever reason that's a hard thing to do. So for people who love incandescent light bulbs, you're always going to be able to find a way to get them, I think.
I had my former, my brother's former mother-in-law. She's deceased now, but she stocked up when the ban came into effect 12 years ago or whatever it was.
Yeah.
She stocked up on incandescent light bulbs. She probably still could sell them on eBay for $1 million to.
Well, there's probably a website, like you can probably just import them from another country if you need it. Like, I think there's always ways around it.
Like
but
Cuban cigars, there's always a way.
Yeah, the amazing thing about this review that this guy did on his channel, to hook up on YouTube, is the technology, I think, has finally reached the point where, now, unfortunately, it's not all bulbs. Like, so he reviewed 25 different bulbs. But the best bulbs are basically now indistinguishable from incandescent bulbs. And there was one kind of expensive bulb there, $20 or $25 a bulb, and I forget the name of it. And I don't think anyone's going to want to buy one because they don't dim. So it's sort of a limited use case. But in all of these metrics, he actually found this one LED bulb outperformed the incandescent in terms of, like, these are the things that he looked at.
It's depth. Instruments are involved.
So he looked at color rendering, like the light spectrum. That's what incandescent bulbs have always been good at. They a very even light spectrum. You get all colors of the rainbow in the spectrum, whereas in LEDs and compact fluorescence, you often get a spike in the blue light and the green light, and that kind of ruins them. But
especially if you're lighting a living room or you have paintings and just general decor, it just kind of throws things off.
You want your light to be accurate always, and it's more pleasing that way too. So he looked at the color rendering, the power efficiency, like did it actually output the amount of light that it said it was for the wattage that it was. He looked at flicker. And that's another complaint, more common in fluorescence, but people complain about flicker in these bulbs, which is often imperceptible, but some people are sensitive to it. But even incandescent bulbs actually flicker because it works on the 60 hertz electricity cycle. Yeah, most people don't know that. But
you've got to get out a high-speed camera and record this, Brian. You have to do this right now.
But the thing with an incandescent bulb, like it's heating up a filament, a tungsten filament. So even though the power is shutting on and off 60 times a second, the filament basically stays lit the whole time because that's just glowing. The nature of the...
It hasn't cooled down.
It takes too long to sort of cool down. But then he looked at the longevity, that's difficult. Like a lot of these LED bulbs, they say, it'll last 10 years, it'll last 20 years, it'll last 20,000 hours or whatever. That is difficult to test because you can't wait, 20 years to do that if you're making a YouTube video. But he disassembled all of these bulbs and used his expertise to kind of look at how they're all constructed and then make a guess about how long they're going to last, also based on the temperature that they're putting out. So he put all of these things where he was measuring, you leave the light bulb on.
This is so down your alley. You must have been on cloud nine.
If we hadn't started this podcast, I think I would have started a light bulb review channel. I just love this stuff. Although I don't think I'm patient enough to do all the work that this guy did, which is why I'm giving him a nice plug here.
You'd also need a lab coat, I think.
Yeah, so he disassembled them, saw how they were constructed, and then took temperature readings because the hotter the bulb runs, the more likely it is to kind of burn out quickly. And then also dimming performance. This is another problem with LED bulbs. Some of them don't dim at all, and then some of them it can be difficult to dim them. But basically the result of this is... to cut to the chase, if you want to buy a really nice, pleasing light bulb with excellent color, good dimming performance, color rendering, all these things, it's the Philips Ultra Definition 60-watt equivalent bulb. That's what he determined was the best. There was that other more expensive one that did beat in some categories, but those are $20, $25 a bulb or something. That seems kind of not particularly relevant, and that one's not dimmable. But, these are about $3 a bulb, so they're not the cheapest. But I don't think you want to go for the cheapest when you're shopping for light bulbs. So like $3 American, about $5 Canadian. The Philips Ultra Definition 60-watt equivalent. These have, excellent, basically indistinguishable from an incandescent bulb.
Brian, all my bulbs are smart bulbs. I don't mess with dumb bulbs anymore.
Yeah, these are dumb bulbs. They're not connected. So, that could be a deal breaker for you. But I have a lot of light bulbs in my house, so a lot of them don't have to be smart bulbs like the ones in this room that I use once a week. I will say, too, that I do have a lot of Philips bulbs, and some of them have died prematurely. I don't know if you've had that experience.
Not yet. I'm worried about that because I do have some expensive smart color bulbs that at the time were like 50, 60 bucks or something.
Yeah, I had a couple of those die on me. So, word of caution. But the thing is, I enjoy buying light bulbs so much that I actually don't mind when they die, because then I get all excited because then I get to buy another light bulb. Yeah, but I thought that was super useful. Philips Ultra Definition, or if you're really interested, look up the Hookup on YouTube for their in-depth light bulb review.
And this all makes sense to me. It's like there's better technology that happens to use less energy. It's right up our alley. It's like everything else we're interested in, whether it's cars or solar energy or wind. It just makes sense, and it's something that we look forward to. We expect the world to improve.
But it has taken a long time to get to this point where they're indistinguishable, and not all of them are. The cheaper ones are not indistinguishable. They have a blue spike, they have a green spike, so be careful. Like 90% of the time, 90% of the people can't tell the difference, even on the cheaper bulbs. But if you're picky about this kind of stuff, we are finally at the point where they are indistinguishable.
Well, that's good news. Brian, last week you brought up a sad story of the week, and that was that our province next door, the oil and gas capital of Canada, Alberta, which I drove through, and I may not drive through again. I may just boycott them. I may just power through and get to British Columbia and not give them any of my hotel money, because, God, I hate them. They've got a new premier who is kind of U.S. style. She's into conspiracy theories. Danielle Smith is her name. And for some reason, the province voted for her, largely the rural areas. The thing about this moratorium that you mentioned last week, it's a solar and wind moratorium. They're going to stop new projects from being built. Well, the thing is, what grabbed my attention was that it's more than the 6 months that the headline said. It's actually 7 months, and it's $25 billion. Like, the province is, not the smallest jurisdiction in the world, but that is a fortune of money that they are turning away and shooting themselves in the foot, just shooting themselves in the foot over and over again.
Yosemite Sam style.
Exactly. Why? Why would they be so stupid just to appease rural residents who are worried? Like, polling says that half the people in Alberta consider themselves tied to oil and gas strongly. So I guess that they're threatened by it. But come on, that's just you're turning away $25 billion. It's amazing what governments do for social conservative concerns of the people who get their information on Facebook. It's just amazing.
Yeah, they're doing it for votes. It helps them with votes.
So they have a commission there that is in charge of the various electrical grids. And they said that, yes, we can get to net zero by 2035. Here's 3 pathways. And she says we can't get to net zero. And our dipshit premier, Scott Moe is his name, total jackwagon, which is a term that his predecessor coined for all intents and purposes. Jackwagon. Feel free to use that. I've started using it since then over the last 10 years. Man's a total jackwagon. The thing is, he's lying to us. He's lying to us, saying our electricity bill will double if we go, like, double, not just go up. And, CBC finally did a story on it later and said, well, no, these experts said that, one study said, nothing, and the other study said 0.9 cents per kilowatt. Well, it's not like our electricity is not going to go up 0.9 cents a kilowatt over the next 10, 15 years. It's going to anyway, right? So it's not that significant. They just don't want to. They don't want to threaten the small and medium oil and gas people that are funding their campaigns. And Danielle Smith in Alberta suggested that the science on climate change is unsettled. Our friend over at the Energy Media with an I at the end of Energy, Markham Hislop, he interviewed Dwayne Bratt, political science professor at Mount Royal University. Markham is a energy journalist and doing good work out of BC, but formerly from Alberta. Basically, this guy says there's a huge threat of wind and solar in the people who fund that political party. Yeah, he was a little bit cynical about the people who say, hey, let's go nuclear, because our province is doing that too.
Some of the people who are most anti solar and wind are actually pro-nuclear. I'm not sure they're actually pro-nuclear as much as they are using nuclear as a stick to beat up environmentalists.
Yeah, I have no... the federal government just gave $74 million to our province to explore nuclear, small modular, which doesn't exist yet, as unproven. and certainly not cheap by the time we need it in a little over 10 years. We're not going to have nuclear reactors here. They have no intention of doing it. It's a delay tactic. It's a piss off the environmentalist tactic. Most of the donors to the Alberta Premier's Party were junior and mid-sized operators. That's probably the same here where you and I live. The big oil companies donated to the ruling party at the time because that's what they do. They know, he says that they know what's coming. The big oil companies know what's coming and they're preparing for it, but the little oil companies don't care.
So now you look at the oil and gas sector today. You've got the Pathways Alliance, which is a global conglomerate, the Alberta base, but they operate around the world. They know what is coming, and they are trying to prepare for it. And we can say, well, whether they're moving fast enough or in the right direction, they do have a sense of what's happened. But the mid-sized and juniors, they don't operate that way. And therefore, this is a defensive mechanism. You know, they're not looking for 2050. They're looking to get through the next 5 years, the next 10 years. The future will take care of itself. We need defensive action now.
Think about what this 7-month moratorium does, Brian. If you were an investor and you were saying, well, I'm going to take my investment of $100 million into solar in Alberta, would you do that? And he says, no, it's not just a 7-month moratorium. It's a complete shutting down of it. It's more than that. It's a signal.
6 months, 7 months. It's more than that because it's a signal. They are signaling to very large developers, you are not welcome here. All right. That is a long-term reputational damage because even though they're not using the language of climate change, by attacking wind and solar, and there's no other way of saying it, it's a direct attack on it, that will have a long-term reputational damage well beyond 7 months. Even if this moratorium lifts in February, would you risk millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to invest in Alberta, thinking they could do it again 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now? And think about the reputational damage that this may indeed cause Alberta. It's too early to tell, but this could have long-term economic ramifications that we're not thinking through because we're so fixated on the now.
Shooting themselves in the foot, Brian. Shooting themselves right in the foot. And the Alberta website says in 2015, because I mentioned last week to your surprise that they're going to burn their last lump of coal this week. I went and double-checked that because I wanted to make sure. And yeah, that's true. That's what's anticipated to happen. Their own website says, that was linked to from a CBC article, in 2015, the government announced the elimination of emissions from coal power generations to occur by 2030, but Alberta will be fully transitioned from coal powered electricity by the end of 2023, reflecting industry and our government's shared commitment, to global leadership in environmental, social, and governance outcomes, which are increasingly driving investment decisions. And that is true. You know, the investment decisions, like we said on the show, are being driven by how clean is your grid. Do I have to provide my own clean electricity, or are my investors in my company going to get on me for my emissions? So shooting themselves in the foot over and over and over. Same here.
And if you're a company like Amazon, you want to put up a warehouse somewhere, you want it to be powered by clean electricity, this all factors into this. So why they'd be discouraging companies like Amazon from coming in and doing business is very weird to me from a pro-business party. Another story here from Electrek. So last week, we reported on the advancements happening in solar panel factories and battery storage factories in the U.S. that have happened as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. So another kind of follow-up story this week from Electrek, and this is about the auto sector. And this comes from the Environmental Defense Fund and an engineering and design firm, WSP USA. So very similar to last week's story, we were talking about roughly $100 billion in new investment in solar and grid storage from the Inflation Reduction Act. And the numbers are very similar for the auto sector. They figure it at $92.4 billion of concrete investments in EV and EV battery factories in the U.S. as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act.
The auto industry is putting gobs of money into this, as are the battery factories. There's a new one in Quebec this week announced as well.
Yes. And this is with great encouragement from the U.S. government and the subsidies they're providing. I think the job figure for solar last week was 20,000. The job figure for EVs is 80,000. I guess making cars is a much more labor-intensive kind of industry. So a similar number overall with 92 million in investments. But here's a couple amazing statistics as well from this story. By 2026, so after all this gets built, a lot of these are just announcements. By 2026, U.S. EV manufacturing facilities will be able to make about 4.7 million passenger EVs annually. That'll be 36% of what's made now. That's by 2026. And then by 2027, they'll be able to produce 12.2 million new passenger vehicles, which represents 95% of new vehicles sold based on what's being sold right now.
Well, that's good news.
We talk about this all the time. When is this going to happen? When is it going to be all EV? This suggests in the U.S. it could be as soon as 2027. Once the manufacturing capacity is there, that 95% of the vehicles are electric. Who's going to buy those 5% gas vehicles? It's going to be kind of a very specific sort of thing. So the biggest states for these EV manufacturing investments and jobs would be Georgia, Michigan, and Tennessee. So they're the ones that are going to benefit the most, but there's several other states in the running here. This is a real horse race here. Like I'd be excited to see this actually come to pass by 2027 if this can all, get built and happen.
Georgia is almost twice as much investment in jobs as Michigan. It's Georgia's benefiting and the Republicans want to take all this away.
Pro-business parties being anti-business.
The CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, is that his name? He went,
Yep.
He took a Ford F-150 Lightning electric truck, one of his products, on a bit of a road trip. And he had some, stark realizations, because I think it took him 40 minutes to charge from 0 to 40%. And they realized that's not good enough. It only charges at 150. Now, that may be good for an efficient, small, medium-sized car. But for a big pickup truck, you're going to have to do lots of charging if you're towing and stuff like that. And it's going to have to do a lot better than 150 kilowatts.
Yeah, the bigger the battery, the longer it takes to charge. So you better speed up that charging.
But my point is there's a long way to go. And I've had a bit of a revelation when that happened. Because I was dissing the Cybertruck last week. Well, the Cybertruck sort of kicked the other OEMs in the butt when they announced their stuff. Yeah. I think it's probably going to do it again when you start comparing the two, okay? Like it might have similar towing, it might have similar payload, but it might have similar range, but the charging aspect is almost certainly, wouldn't you say, going to be a lot faster in the Cybertruck than, say, the 150 in the F-150, for example.
Yeah, and it remains to be seen how serious Ford is about making these things. They've got this balance of having to make the gas versions, and they're kind of losing money on the EV version, so they don't want to make too many. But we know Tesla's going to come roaring out of the gate and make as many as they possibly can. So, in terms of volume, there's going to be probably more Cybertrucks available for the foreseeable future. So,
when do you think the announcement's going to happen? I can't wait. I'm looking forward to seeing what the next few years are going to be like from this announcement.
Yeah, so there's been lots of sightings of kind of prototype Cybertrucks around. So people are expecting the first delivery event to be probably about 2 months from now, probably in September or maybe October. And it'll be a slow ramp up, of course, maybe a couple thousand delivered this year, but then, maybe the tens of thousands next year.
Well, the point is they didn't have to deliver any, and they shook up the automotive industry, right? I mean, that was a big deal.
The Ford F-150 Lightning electric truck would not exist without the Cybertruck announcement.
And I'd be surprised if there weren't any technical revelations that, were surprising and sort of, some sort of feat that it will blow the competition out of the water. Now, people may not want to look at it.
Yeah.
That might be an issue, and I contend that it very well could be in a couple of years after everyone buys them up. But
well, they're a couple of years late, of course, in delivering them. It's taken them way longer than they were expecting to actually get them out the door. So I think a lot of that's going to be underneath. A lot of that's going to be in the manufacturing. Like, they've spent probably the extra time to get the manufacturing right because they need to make these things at scale and make them at a profit, which everybody else is still struggling with. So that part, I feel like they're probably going to have that nailed, and they're going to be making money like crazy on these things while everyone else still struggles.
So ReThinkX, the think tank of professors who study disruption of past disruption and current disruption and future disruption of technology and economics of that technology. Tony Seba was one of the people that a lot of people have watched presentations with. Well, Adam Dorr is one of their people too, and he's been putting out some videos lately, and he's got a series out now. One of them touched on why we shouldn't waste our time with nuclear. And to those who are pro-nuclear, and I know there's a lot of them, if nuclear was going to be a solution, it would be the solution. Nobody's making nuclear, hardly anybody. And we don't have time, the time to do it would be now, and the reason it's not happening is largely economic, and also a little bit, I'm sure there's a variety of reasons, but largely it's economic. It takes investment from governments to actually make it happen, and that's not necessarily the best deal for taxpayers. So I'm going to go through his video on this and just touch the points very quickly because we're running out of time. Vastly more expensive, not even close. Clean energy can come in at a small fraction of the cost. With no risk. Now, he argues, and they've studied this, that solar, wind, plus batteries, which are all coming down in price, some faster than others, wind's a bit slower pace, but they're all coming down, and a mixture of them in different geographic locations is cheaper than nuclear. And in fact, it comes in at a fraction of the cost, okay? And that's the estimated cost, not what the final cost of nuclear. So solar, wind, and batteries are able to do the task. In some cases, the cost of security alone for a nuclear plant can be more than the all-in cost of solar. Can you believe that? I mean, he showed examples of people with machine guns patrolling. Yeah. It depends on where you are in the world and how much security you have, but that's just a stark analysis.
And one of my favorite stats about clean energy is the fuel costs are zero. So, with a nuclear power plant, it's not as bad probably as a gas plant where you got to always pay for the gas. You got to pay for the uranium to run it, and that's not a small cost. And it's going to probably keep going up. It's
not just uranium, and I'll touch on some other things too. There's other rare minerals. 30 times more expensive and getting worse. It's not getting better. Nuclear plants, in order to meet safety concerns that they've learned about, are getting more expensive, and just everything's becoming more expensive. And because they're not making very many of them, there's not the expertise, and it's taking longer. There's a negative experience curve rather than a positive one that we have for everything else, computers, solar. The more we build, the more expensive it's becoming. And even without red tape in some countries, you can't blame it all on red tape. That's what's happening, because we're learning that it takes more to make them safe, therefore more expensive. So there's problems when they occur at nuclear plants, and they always do. They're costly. France had half of their reactors offline due to a defect in the pipes, in the plumbing. So the levelized cost of electricity, the price per unit of electricity that you compare these things at, assumes that a nuclear power plant, when we hear these things, are going to run at 90%, and they never do. They don't run at 90%. They have to, either get special treatment to sell all of its electricity when wind and solar are high, instead of turning down the things that you're actually consuming for. So that raises the cost, and it's more than you thought. So nuclear is actually offline 10% of the year for maintenance, which is more than a month. Too much water. It's using a lot of water. In France, 75% of the country's electricity comes from nuclear, but 50% of the freshwater withdrawals are coming from nuclear plants. That is to say, they're consuming fresh water. They have a lot of fresh water, but it's a bit of an issue. You need to cool water. You need to have cool water for cooling. It can't be just a little bit cooler. It has to be substantially cooler than what you're trying to cool. Otherwise, it doesn't work very well. Heat waves have shut down power plants, nuclear power plants, because if you cool the power plant and you output really hot water into the river, you kill the ecosystem. So that's an issue, and that's becoming more of a problem. We see headlines all the time on the show. You need political stability to operate. So that's why there's only 33 countries with nuclear power plants now. The other 660 that still have to decarbonize to save the planet, they're not stable enough. So you can't really power the world with it. And the scale has to be constrained due to cost. Big is better so far. So saying that small modular nuclear is a long ways away from ever having a shot at competing with the cost effectiveness of one big ass nuclear plant. All nuclear plants carry a risk of nuclear weapon proliferation. That is an issue, as you know. Everyone knows. And long build times, 2 years siting, 8 years build, 10 years in total. A country could switch, he says, to wind, solar, and battery in that time before the first plant even came online. And yeah, we'd have to be siting plants today in order to meet our deadline. So when we're not, so I don't see how people say nuclear is the answer. If it is, you should phone somebody. I don't know who, but it's not my fault. Reusing nuclear materials is a thought, but it really hasn't happened after decades and billions of dollars of research in that area. A lot of people say, we'll just reuse the stuff, but that hasn't happened. Nuclear reactors need uranium and a bunch of other rare minerals. Did you know that, Brian? It's not just uranium. I can't list them because I can't even pronounce some of them. So mining raw materials is still an issue. People say, well, you have to rare materials for batteries. Well, you have to just the same for nuclear reactors. And it's not just uranium. So nuclear reactors have to be down 10% of the year, as I said, for maintenance. Nuclear waste is still an unsolved issue, especially with the transportation. Can you imagine a rail disaster with nuclear waste? I mean, oil is bad enough and chlorine and all that, but my God. Siting constraints, you need a big exclusion zone in some countries like Singapore, just there's no room for it. So you have to either put rooftop solar on or, bring in energy from another country. Plus the risk of disaster. The accident rate right now is 1 per 1,500 power plant years of operation. So to run all of civilization, and this includes electric vehicles and electric heating that we're going to have to do, you'd need upwards of 20 times more plants. More for transport and heating, as I said. So 18,000 power plants in the world. But if you look at that statistically, Brian, that'd be an accident every month at our current rate of accidents if we had all those reactors. Yikes. Nobody wants that. Can you imagine? What's the nuclear disaster this month? I mean, it shakes up an entire generation when it happens.
Yeah. And, I just love the simplicity of this. Like if you and I had to, we could go online, order up a bunch of solar panels, order up a bunch of batteries, and literally build our own power plant. That's how much simpler it is. Yeah. You and I could not build a nuclear power plant. But
we essentially have them now. We've got the batteries to store the power in. We just can't use them. But we have solar panels on our roof. They're simple. They don't make any noise. They don't kill anyone. There was some manufacturing in them, of course, but, they're going to pay for themselves environmentally very quickly.
No, the simplicity and speed of solar, wind, and batteries, it's insane. No competition.
I wanted to acknowledge the Canadian wildfires in Kelowna, BC, and in Yellowknife, which has been evacuated in the territory of Yukon. I drove through Kelowna for the first time in my life, saw it for the first time in my life, and wildfires were a concern. But we missed it by a few days, because they're telling tourists not to go to that part of the country. We got a month before my trip, I couldn't get a hotel room in that area. That whole Kamloops interior of BC, I couldn't get a hotel room. So they need those for people who are displaced. And it's just an ugly, ugly situation.
No, and meanwhile, the whole city of Yellowknife has been evacuated, 20,000 people, and there's not a close place for them to go. They're driving for 24 hours to get to Edmonton. Not a great situation. Hopefully it improves. Some of the rain is maybe going to come through from California. Of course, massive flooding in California from their weird storm that happened this week. So this is quickly becoming a weather podcast.
Yeah, it is. We should have our own weather channel. I looked up north there to see what the EV situation was like from PlugShare, to see what the charges were like.
Yeah.
And there's not really a good way to get out of Yellowknife to Edmonton at this time, but they are building some things.
Yeah, that is a pretty obscure northern route. So it doesn't surprise me that there's no chargers, but eventually it'll come.
But there are chargers there in the town of Yellowknife. And I'd have to wonder, though, because, they put gas trucks along the highway of people evacuating and temporary gas stations for people to fill up along that route. And there was no lineup at first, but then at some points there was 2 or 3 hours of wait just to get gas.
Yeah.
But what would be like if everybody had EVs? I mean, that would be kind of difficult.
I mean, I guess you could technically pull over somewhere that had a normal plug-in and plug in your EV, and you'd, end up waiting for a day maybe to get enough charge to get to the next place. But it's something.
Maybe in the future, when everyone has an EV, there'll be emergency trucks that drive around that can tie into the grid or even have batteries to charge everyone. That's something.
Tesla has deployed temporary superchargers on occasion, so such a thing could exist.
In the city of Whitehorse, which I consider going to as well.
Yeah, I've been to Whitehorse. It's lovely.
Because the government of the Yukon it's right next to Alaska. So the government has put up all these EV chargers. They have more than you and I do in our province down here, and 1/30 of the population. And they have more chargers. And they don't go anywhere because it stops at the border because nobody else is picking up the slack. But they tried. I mean, good on you, Yukon. That's impressive. Here is the tweet of the week as we run long this week. This is from Polling Canada, quoting a Angus Reid poll. Climate change is fact plus caused by humans, 67% of the population. Fact and caused by natural changes, in other words, not human, 22%. Not proven theory is 7%. So a lot of people in Canada, and maybe now is a good time to convince them that climate change is real. I've seen people on Twitter saying, oh, wow, this is real serious. We should do something. Well, wake up, you morons. Come on. How could you not know what is going on in the world? It takes this to happen. So all these wildfires are directly linked to climate change. Agree, almost 60%. Disagree, 33%. Brian, it's time.
Well, that's not bad. I mean, that's, almost 2/3.
No, it's good. But, I mean, does it take this to make it happen? I don't know.
I think, unfortunately, it does.
Let's dig into the mailbag here and see what we have. This one's from Stephen. You want to read it?
Yeah, so Stephen says, I'm a listener and econut from faraway Winnipeg, which is not that far. I've applied much of the same technologies, like a super insulated straw bale home in 2007 with a cold climate heat pump this year, and one Nissan Leaf that they've had for 10 years, and a 2-year-old Tesla. And he says, my wife happens to be on a holiday with her sister in England, and I thought about getting a tea kettle instead of a T-shirt. This for our new smaller cottage that is in the planning stage, and it is easy to have a 240-volt plug in it. And but is asking me, couldn't see how I adapted my UK kettle, something rated for 3,000 watts. How do you adapt that to a North American? Not only
are you a light bulb expert, you're the resident tea kettle expert.
Yes. Well, this is a thing that I thought that I had invented maybe, but I've since learned that other people have done this. But and apologies to everybody who gets bored
doesn't care about tea
going on about light bulbs and electric kettles. But these are basically my two hobbies, light bulbs and electric kettles. But anyway, so yeah, what I did, just to clarify, so here in North America, we're basically stuck with 1,500 watts if you want an electric kettle. And if you drink tea, you really want an electric kettle.
That's at 120 volts in our system.
At 120 volts. It's kind of the limitations of our standard kind of system. But over in the UK, their standard system is 220 or 240 volts. So 3,000 watt kettles are very common in the UK. So what I did was buy a kettle from Amazon UK and brought it over here. I had my electrician put in a 240 volt outlet in my kitchen, and there's different sizes of those. Like there's large 240 outlets for, like, you can plug in a dryer, and those are good to charge EVs
or an electric, electric car charger. But there's
smaller ones too. So these are kind of normal sized, but the configuration of pins is slightly different, and they can do 240 volts. So you get one of these 240 volt plugs in your kitchen, and then you have to cut off the UK plug off the end of your kettle. This is
really,
yeah.
Well, and that's pretty serious for all that electricity.
Yeah, but, I had an electrician here a few years ago doing some other work, and I asked him about this. I said, hey, is this possible? Do you think you can do this? And he said, gee, that's a great idea. And he actually did it in his own house first.
Really?
Before he did mine. Yeah, he thought it was such a great idea. He ordered the kettle. So, yeah, but you have to cut off the UK plug because you can't put in a UK plug in North America. So you cut off the UK plug, you take out the wires, and you wire it up to a North American 240 volt plug. You stick that on, and then you can stick it into your outlet. So as far as I know, there's no kind of simple adapter that you can do. You have to physically cut off the plug. So don't do it unless you're an electrician. I was able to do it a second time. So our first kettle died. So I had to buy another one from the UK. But I took apart the first one and I saw how he had connected the wires. So I was able to do the second one myself. But, please get an electrician to do it. I don't want anyone to get electrocuted
because of us.
But, yeah, but it's awesome having a 3,000 watt kettle. We've had it probably 10 years, well, maybe not 10 years, 5, 6, 7 years, and couldn't imagine living without it.
So why did it break? You're using that much? Did you buy the different brand this time?
It was a kind of a cheap one, and it rusted through, and it started leaking water out the bottom.
Okay.
I mean, appliances are not made well, but the second one has lasted 5 or 6 years now so far.
So it's not electrical related.
Just rusted through.
It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Golly, we're running late this week, but this is good because we're off next week, everyone. Brian and I are going to take another week off vacation. Brian is traveling, and we thought, why not? You can handle it. But we got an extra show for you this week. Ford Motor Company is joining with 2 battery component makers to build a cathode active material plant in Quebec, Canada, worth more than $1.2 billion. So just throwing around the billions here like crazy. And some provinces turn them down. Anyway, Honda confirms it will adapt Tesla's NACS adapter, driven by GM's adoption. So, yeah, but where's Kia and Hyundai? I mean, where are they? Have you read anything?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything, but this is looking like a done deal with the NACS as the default for North America, which is great.
Okay, it's time for some nuclear news. Some more nuclear news. Japan will begin a contentious plan to release treated wastewater from the wrecked Fukushima nuclear reactor into the Pacific Ocean on August 24th. And no, they're not just dumping it, they're trickling it out for 30 years. Because everything in nuclear takes a long time, including when you're contaminating the planet. Tokyo Electric Power Company says that they can start the process to discharge 1.3 million cubic meters of water, equivalent to about 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools of juicy radioactive water over a period of 30 years.
And if they do it over 30 years, they should avoid a Godzilla situation.
No guarantees. Claims for weather-related incidents are set to exceed $100 billion for the third year in a row, as floods, hail, and wildfires linked to climate change become more frequent. I was looking at the charger at my first hotel, and in the background was a Chevy dealership. And at that dealership, they had hard covers to put over their cars. I think I mentioned this before. But they've got these hard canopies now that they've spent a great deal of money on because they're losing. I mean, you lost your car to hail because of the same thing, right? I mean, you had a Tesla ready to go in Calgary and it got killed along with like 40 other cars. And okay, so the output for nuclear power has fallen by around a third in the past decade due to aging reactors. Clean Technica reminds us that Tesla will have bidirectional charging in all EVs by 2025. And it was mentioned casually at their March Investor Day, but really not discussed. Do you remember hearing that? Because it sort of got by a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't quite remember that. It's something they haven't been too hot on, but by 2025, yeah, sure, why not?
The UN's resident coordinator for Kenya gets the Hyundai Ioniq 5 as an official vehicle. So I say, I can't have enough of that. We need people in power driving electric vehicles to know what it's like. And finally, this week, the numbers are truly impressive. Solar generation experienced an impressive growth, soaring nearly 20-fold from 2,600 gigawatt hours. You know, that's 2,600 hours of a nuclear reactor to astonishing almost 50,000 gigawatt hours in California. Wind generation demonstrated a commendable increase of 63%. On the other hand, there was a substantial decline in natural gas generation for the state, 20% down, and coal has been gradually phased out of the power mix altogether, marking a significant shift. In addition to contributing to the total utility generation, rooftop solar has experienced exponential phenomenal growth of 10 times in 2022, remarkable progress for that has resulted in a generation of 24,000 gigawatt hours of clean power. That is a lot of rooftop solar when you think about all those things putting out, a couple of dozen nuclear power plants worth at their peak.
And governments can try and slow this stuff down, but they will not stop it.
Thank you for listening. We appreciate you coming along for the ride for the show. As I said, that is it for this week, but we will be back in 2 weeks. And then probably, after that, you're going to be from a remote location in the United States.
Yeah, see you in 2 weeks from Telluride, Colorado.
Our United States correspondent, Brian Stockton, will be digging deep into the United States. If you're there, take the time to contact us. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com is the best way. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for special features. And the Clean Energy Store is there in your show notes if you'd like to support the merchandise and support our show as well in a small way. If you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your podcast app, which is what we always do. You can always rate and review us. That helps us. So see you next time.
Yeah, see you in 2 weeks.